Good morning.
Hello.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
And likewise, hello to everyone.
Good morning, Bu Susan and Pak Paul.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Oh, good to see you. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to see all these familiar faces.
Thank you, Bu.
Yeah, sure.
We still have a very productive writing group. Many
Good.
repeat customers to the APHIS academic writing workshops.
Oh, wow. That's very good to know.
Yes,
So-
indeed. Yeah.
In fact, for those of you who have been a part of previous academic writing workshops, we would love to hear your feedback about revisiting the material, because we know we are giving you materials from past workshops because it's such quality work that we felt still deserves some good airtime, and we could focus our time with questions with our speakers. But in your feedback forms later on, we would love to hear about how you feel about the new structure of things and watching these previously recorded videos and revisiting them. There's so much content in them that I think that's maybe one of the reasons why it's useful to revisit. But I will leave it to our MC for today to maybe get us started. Thank you all again for joining us.
Thanks, Megan.
All right, thank you very much. Hi, hello, everyone. Good morning. I would like to welcome you all to our second session of the 2023 academic writing workshop on getting your work published in international academic journals. And this event is organized in collaboration between the American Institute for Indonesian Studies, known as IFIS, and also Henry Lee's Foundation. And today I am Ferdinand Long, will be your host as well as your moderator for the next hour. And, even though it has been pretty cloudy from where I'm at the moment, but I'm very excited, and I hope you are all very excited also for this insightful workshop. And I think we can just go directly. But before we go further, I think in order to ensure that our today's session is running smoothly and optimally, there are several things that I would like to point out. So if the committee can show the guideline first. Thank you. So, yeah, we would like to encourage active participation from all of the participants throughout the workshop. Feel free to ask questions, chime in with your insights, and engage in discussions. But also, please keep your microphones muted when you are not speaking to minimize background noise and ensure a clear audio experience for everyone. And also, I would like to, for you to please ensure that your speakers and headphones are working properly to hear the audio clearly throughout the sessions. And also during interactive sessions or during the breakout rooms, which we will have later on, please use the raise hand feature or type your question in the chat box to indicate that you would like to speak or ask question. And please utilize the chat box for sending a question, also sharing relevant resources or links, and also to connect with one another. And if you encounter any technical difficulties, feel free to reach out to our team. And please note that this workshop may be recorded for future reference or for those who are unable to attend. Therefore, by participating in this online event, you are agreeing to the possibility of being recorded. So if you do not wish to appear or be heard, please kindly disable your camera and microphone. Thank you very much for the guideline for comedy. So I believe that you had a highly advantageous and practical session on the first session last week with Mr. Paul Kratoska. So we will continue to the second part today. I assume that all of you have watched also the videos thoroughly because we are joined by our esteemed experts. Thank you for joining us. We have Paul Nerney and Susan Nerney.
Hi. Good to see you, everybody, and good to be here.
Thank you very much.
Indeed.
Yeah. So we will soon open our Q&A session with Paul and Susan based on all the things that you have watched. So therefore, should I introduce you first, maybe Susan and Paul,
Sure.
while the participants trying to prepare their questions. So in order to know our speakers a little bit better, so let me introduce them briefly. So Susan Lopez Nerney designed, coordinated, and taught language, writing, and professional communication courses for undergraduates and graduates in the Center for English Language Communication at the National University of Singapore from 1992 until 2013. And she has conducted writing workshops for graduate degree candidates and junior faculty in Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Thailand, the Philippines, and also Indonesia. And she is a mentor for the U.S. Social Science Research Council's Global Scholars Initiative. Thank you for joining us, Susan.
Very glad
And
to
we
be
have,
here.
thank you very much.
Forward to this.
And we have also Paul Nerney, who designed, taught, and coordinated courses in English as second language also, and English as a first school language for the Center for English Language at NUS. And he also worked under the Provost's office to design, teach, and coordinate writing and critical thinking models for the University Scholars Program and University Town Residential Program. And more recently, he has conducted writing workshops for graduate degree also, and junior faculty in Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Thailand, the Philippines, Hong Kong, and Indonesia. And he is also a mentor for the U.S. Social Science Research Council's Global Scholars Initiative. Thank you very much for joining us, Paul. So thank you very much. So therefore, I will officially open our Q&A session with Paul and Susan today. So again, for all of you who have any questions or any things to discuss with our speakers today, please kindly, you can either raise your hand or you can just write it on a chat box. Okay, Megan, I see you first. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'll kick us off to get us warmed up. Actually, maybe I want to, we'll take this first part of the session to direct questions towards Susan first, thinking specifically about what academic writing English. But I wanted to ask you, Susan, it's such a topic that it's a hard one to dive right into because it's such a detailed one. It's one that requires everyone to look in such a detailed, close way at their own writing, that I wondered, what is one way that we can enter into this conversation in a general way that's sort of useful tips that you might want to start off our conversation?
Okay. One of the things that I usually start off with is I like to read what people have done.
Yeah.
And then that gives me an indication of where they're at in terms of their language. The other thing is, we're currently doing another workshop for the Asian Research Institute at NUS. And another thing that, sometimes the writing is, because nowadays you have so many things on the computer that can really help write and edit. But it's when we're talking to the people, to the writers themselves, that you get a better understanding of how they write. Because, and Paul's gonna talk about this, really important in writing is the ideas that are formulated by the writers themselves. And when we do these workshops, we always begin by not the language. The language is, as I tell everybody, that's the first thing your reader sees, but that's the last thing you work on. So you work on your ideas and then you work on your language. So in these workshops that we do, we attend to the ideas first and make sure everybody understands what they're saying and what they want to say. So, and then when they're clear on that, they can express it better in their own words. Then we work on the wording. So it really is important to know your ideas. Do not concentrate on your language, because otherwise you really get bogged down. Sometimes it's how people, stay on because they say, oh, I don't know how to say this, but that's why we pull it out of them from these individual consultations and from their conversations with other people who are in the same boat. So the ideas are first, then the wording comes next.
Yeah. Well, that said, it's interesting because although I work on basically generating ideas and then organizing them, one thing that I've certainly noticed over the years is once you have those ideas clear in your head, then it becomes much easier to write them. In fact, actually, with a lot of people, and by the way, this is true both for people who speak English as their first language and people who speak English as an additional language. Actually, when we're writing, there's no such thing as a native speaker of written academic English. We all learn this in school. We do not learn it at home. We learn it in school. And so whether English is your main language that you use, or whether it's an additional language you use, we all start at the same point. And what that tells me, whether I'm dealing with people who who continually write in English all the time, or whether people who are using it as an additional language, and some of their writing is in English, some of it will be in other languages. It doesn't make any difference. The critical thing here is that once you've worked through your ideas, then if you're worried about language errors, that you'll find that there'll be just a small number of error types that occur again and again and again in your writing. And they tend to be surface level things that can actually be cleared up fairly easily. They're not causing conceptual problems. So if you really looked at your stuff, then you're okay. Susan's going to do something which is really, really interesting. I don't see other people doing this. She's not going to be talking about grammar, correct grammar and vocabulary directly. She's going to be going underneath that to say there's certain things you need to do with language. Notice I'm saying do with language that will make your text, make your manuscript read like a research article, as opposed to, for example, a research report or a research proposal or something entirely different. Okay, so with that, I've said enough.
Yeah.
Susan said enough. Let the games begin.
All right, thank you very much. Hope it answered your question, Megan. So yeah, so we have another question here. I see someone's raising her hand. So we have Nadila. Yes, Nadila.
Okay, thank you, Kak Firman, for the opportunity for me. Good morning and hello, Dr.
morning,
Susan and
Nadila.
Dr. Paul. I am Nadila from Universitas Gajah Mada. So I
Okay.
would like to ask about, in relation to your materials before I read it, how to actually reduce the excessive use of like conjunction in the beginning of the sentence, such as however, in order to in relation to our next, something like that, because I sometimes use it to excessive. Also, the second question is actually my advisor before told me that there is different purposes of each word. They can having like positive, negative, or like a neutral, categorize something like that. How to we can differentiate it, how we know that this word is tend to be negative or tend to be positive, or is this word is neutral. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Two questions, right? The first one is you're asking how to avoid putting all these connections. Okay, like although, instead of, etc. First of all, one of the things I want to emphasize, one of the problems that really I find in my work is the problem of cohesion. In other words, connection between the ideas. And in fact, what I find is that people don't connect their ideas sufficiently. Therefore, it's up to the reader to make the connections. And you don't want that. You don't want the reader to do that. You really want to make the reader see how you're connecting idea A and idea B. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is by using what I call the linking words. I think if you've gotten my materials, you would have gotten a list of what are the links that you have available out there and how you can use them. Okay, so that's one. First of all, I want to emphasize the idea that it's important that you make your ideas clear. Secondly, of course, you may want to, after you write, okay, you've got to write that, and then you've got to edit your paper. You've got to revisit it. And see, when you're doing that, then you can see, oh, I've said this already, then I don't need to say this again. So you can edit it for overdoing your connections. Okay, so that's important for how you're asking, how do you remove too much use of cohesive devices. Secondly, while you can use cohesive words, linking words for connecting your ideas, another way of connecting it is by positioning your sentences. So it's the position of the sentences vis-a-vis each other. For example, you say, there are two factors that influence this decision. A, da, 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 B. You've connected them without, you know. So in other words, you first show what is the connection and then you show the parts. And in that way, you don't have to say, you know, additionally, additionally, okay? So by positioning your ideas, so one is by use of cohesive devices, the other one is by positioning your sentences. And of course, really, you've got to revisit your text. Sometimes that's why, because one of the things, okay, I'm looking now at one of the features I talk about, which is conciseness. One of the things that people tend to do when they're writing their first draft, mind you, you eventually should edit your own paper before you show it to anyone, is sometimes you write as you speak. And when you speak, you're putting, I mean, you might not notice it, but you're adding a lot of, oh, one more thing. And additionally, oh, and if you write that in, you will see a proliferation of these devices when they're not needed. Okay, so basically 3 ways. 1, first of all, make sure you use cohesive devices. 2, positioning within the sentence and within the text. I'm sorry, so location of the sentences, of the ideas. And thirdly, steering away from spoken version of your language to a written version. But my one thing I want to emphasize is you don't want to do this at the beginning when you're drafting. You know, you don't want to really focus. Really, you don't want to focus on your language as you're putting your ideas down, because you will not progress. Okay, so write, then edit. That's really the second thing. The other thing is, how do you know when it's positive or negative? Well, one of the things that I gave you, I mean, see, in English, and I'm sure in your own language, you already know instinctively that this word, when you say it, people don't like it because it's got negative connotations. It's the same thing in English. And I'm afraid really just familiarity with the language can do this. All right. I mean, it won't tell you this word is negative. I don't know whether you recall, but in my lecture, I talked about how some words can be very negative, flawed, for example, versus unambiguous. Or, and you say bad versus good, of course, you know what bad and good is. But sometimes some words in English, and I'm sure as you have it in your own language, some words are kind of neutral. Like if you say complete, is that good or bad? It depends on the context in which you use it. Okay, do you recall I gave you a table of like what are some of the languages that words that people use in the UK and the US to describe good work, neutral work, and bad work. So you look at the words, sometimes they're very neutral, but depending also on the context in which they are used, you will know if they're being used negatively or positively. So I'm sorry, but in English, and I'm sure in your language, how the words are situated in your text can influence your assessment of it. Is it a negative assessment or not? Okay. I think in my lecture on moderation, like how you can actually make your evaluations more easy to accept by using adversative, although so you can neutralize the impact even of negative words. And thirdly, I think in my handouts, I gave you a list of what are common positive and negative words. So just commit. I'm sorry, but you got to be familiar with the language. On your own, you got to do that. And my suggestion is to read other people's work, learn from others. And that's it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Susan.
Yeah,
It's
can
clear.
I just cut in about the reading also, that when you're reading, I mean, if you're reading for information, you read one way and you're not going to be focused on the language, but you're going to be focused on the idea. But what Susan's suggesting is really a good idea, that especially if there's something that you really, an article that you really like, do a close reading. In other words, pay attention to the lexis, to the words that are being used in a sentence, because people are usually using them very purposefully. Okay, and the selection of words is not random. there's a system to their thinking. And if you start to read those words, you'll start to see patterns of words when negative words are being used, when neutral words are being used, when there's positive words being used. And it's focused on research articles because there are some very, very definite patterns that go on here. Sadly, we don't understand them a whole lot because the research hasn't been done on these things. But that shouldn't stop you. That shouldn't stop you from coming up with your own observations on how other people write. And then that will really impact on you, how you write. In other words, we're talking about your voice, your style, because that's what's going to happen. Your use of words is going to focus a very particular way you have of talking to colleagues in your basically in your research community, the way you talk to people who do research but they're outside your community, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so, and I won't say anything more about that, but the key to this whole thing is read a lot, because you're an intelligent person. You will actually start to see patterns if you really kind of look at the wording and say, why are we getting why is this person using a certain verb? Especially look at verbs. Why are we getting these verbs that connect two other ideas together? And that's going to tell you an awful lot about how people are using words. And then, of course, when you look at the context around that sentence that you're looking, you'll be able to tell, wow, this guy's really, it's pretty negative actually, or I think the researcher really likes what other colleagues have done here. Or actually, a little neutral here. The researcher is not really taking a position vis-a-vis what other people have said. I wonder why that's happening, and what is the wording that the person's using. And you will actually start to, there's a lot of stuff you can do on your own, actually. So,
All right.
okay, I'll stop there and turn it back over.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
All right, thank you very much, Paul and Susan. So yeah, we already got a handful of questions now on the chat box. So I'm gonna read the first one. So this one comes from Shirley Hindra Nagoro. She asked about the title of the article. So she would like to know about the title of the article. While reading some articles, I found many writing styles of the title. How do we make the appropriate title that could be allowed in academic journals? Thank you. Maybe Susan or Paul, if you would like to chime in.
You know, it's interesting that we are, as I said, we're currently doing a workshop here for Ireland. We see some titles, and my general reaction is firstly, your title has to be indicative of what you're going to talk about in your paper. Okay, and sometimes you see this title and then that's not what they're talking about in their paper. So it has to reflect the contents of the ideas in your paper and not just a topic. If you want, the point is you want to communicate, convey the idea that you are going to develop in your paper as soon as possible. Because the people who will read your paper, they're not reading it like a novel. They want to read it quickly, get the results, and move on. So the first thing they would read is not your abstract. They would read your title. So you got to give them an indication of what is going to be contained in your article. 2, I've seen long titles and all that. You have to make it concise. All right. And that needs a little bit of work. And sometimes, if you can, ask the help of other people. What do you think of this title? Does it convey what I'm saying in the paper, or is it too long? And you can revise. Title is not fixed, okay? But my point is the title is your first one that grabs the reader. So it's got to be useful to the reader. And of course, it's got to be grammatically correct. The spelling is correct. Not too many details, not too long. So that's my practical advice to anybody thinking about titles. It has to be accurately reflecting contents of your paper.
Yeah, just as a guideline, think of the title no more than 10 to 12 words. You can make it shorter if you want, but 10 to 12 words. And I think aside from the topic, you do have to identify the topic, but you also have to identify the response to the topic.
Yeah.
You can leave everything else like the gap and the question and everything, but to be done later. But basically, something that reflects this is my topic, and here's a response. Just identify it. You don't have to describe it. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to argue it, certainly. But just do that. Sometimes people use a main title and a subtitle, but once again, that's still in that 10 to 12 words. I would suggest don't be cute in the title. Don't try to be clever. Just say it straight out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think what hinders us also the most is that we're trying to be artistic and trying to formulate our title, right? Which sometimes might not be too effective in, trying to compiling our ideas. But yeah, thank you very much, Paul and Susan. So the next question comes from Laurentia Sumarni. So, hello, Dr. Susan and Paul Nerney. I'd like to know about the use of I in a research articles. I'm qualitative researcher using ethnographic method. Should I retain I in the research article, or should I adjust to the type of journal I'm sending my article to? What would you recommend for using style in research articles? Thank you so much.
Okay, that's interesting because as I was reviewing my materials, that's one of the things that I noted. And in my lecture, I don't know whether you recall what I said, that I cited a table that was produced by the authors of the book that I really like to use, Swales and Feet. And what they did was they surveyed a lot of writing that has been done and picked out the conventions that are very commonly used and the conventions that are used but not so commonly. One of these is the use of I. And I must admit, a long time ago, or I don't know how long ago, but before, people were prohibited from using I, except in certain fields. I know mathematics allows the use of that. But one of the things I also noticed, these conventions, they're conventions. They're not hard, fast rules, unlike grammar. They're conventions that change. And I was listening to Paul Kotoska the other day, and he's saying that nowadays, more and more people are using I. Okay, so my suggestion is look at the writing in your field and see what people are doing. And especially if you're beginning to publish your paper, just follow along with what is more commonly used. If in your field, people are using a lot of I, like in anthropology, I think they do use them. Okay, so you can use it. But in some other fields, it may not be so common. So you familiarize yourself with the community that you're talking to, the kind of material that they're used to, and just, as I said, if you're beginning publisher, beginning author, just use the more common convention. But yes, you can use I nowadays compared to the past, but still, just bear in mind, it is something that is not so common in some fields. Hope that answers your question.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things here also is the whole issue of I really started in the 1920s with the rise of social science as we understand it today. And there was a concern among social scientists that we have to be objective. We cannot be subjective. I, of course, is you identify yourself as a subject. In other words, a self-aware, learning, knowing entity in the world. And that was problematic to a lot of people because in terms of gathering data and then analyzing data, they wanted a way of being objective, of basically taking bias out of whatever it is that we say, basically cutting the I out, the knowing subject, and so it was basically always to avoid the use of I, or we for that matter. I think we've kind of come around to the idea, especially if you are in anthropology or anthropology, that's those sorts of fields. In other words, something that straddles between humanities and social sciences. That it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. If there's going to be bias, it's going to happen whether you avoid I or you don't. The secret really is, I mean, the issue really is about how we collect and then how we analyze data. That's really where it is. And of course, we see now in ethnography, for example, there's a growing concern with actually giving voice to the participants in a situation at your research site, and really letting them speak for themselves. In other words, it's not even about me, the researcher, having my voice. But what I really want to do is I want to privilege the voices of the people who are participating to get their story out about what they think about a given situation. What is their knowledge about this or that? What are their beliefs and values? So we're seeing this breakdown, and it really is kind of really. I mean, it began with ethnology, a few years ago, but we see this kind of leading out or flowing out into other places. So as Susan said, and this is important, that you should just look at what's going on in your field, read the research, and not just read it. I mean, look at it, analyze it for how people are positioning themselves, the I, and how they're positioning the people who were them or they. But as I contacted them, as I worked with them, they became kind of an important you in my life. And I want the yous, in other words, my research participants, to actually have a voice. And I want to make sure that voice is accurate, that it reflects what they think. Okay?
Right. Thank you. Our next question comes from Jeffrey Ali Saiful from UM Surabaya. So he asks about how many ideas are maximum to express in an English sentence, especially in the context of English academic writing for publication. Do we only need like one idea in a sentence, or two, or maybe like three ideas? Any comments, Paul or Susan?
Okay, let me deal with that question. I was just talking to one of the participants in a workshop. Let me start from the minimum. If you have an important idea, a very important idea, like your research finding or your research question, make that one sentence, because structurally it will stand out. Don't combine important ideas in one sentence. Single them out by separating them, even if they're short. The question is, why is this? The answer is because the, okay? Because that will give prominence to the ideas that you want to stand out. Now, the question is, how many ideas can we put in one sentence? I don't know, because it depends on the idea that you are conveying. But just remember, there are important ideas, like I said, your research question, your research gap, your research answer, they must stand out. And sometimes you need to repeat, okay? Like say, why is this da da da? In other words, okay, your connectedness there. In other words, how or why do people do this, da 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 da? So you're actually emphasizing it, but putting important ideas separately. But perhaps if you're talking about details, like in the situation, there were 3 people doing A, B, C, and D. Perhaps that's not critical to the idea that you want to develop, so you can put those ideas. So it's really, my answer to your question is, I cannot give you a count and put 4 ideas together or 3 ideas together, except for one. The ideas that are very important must stand alone in one sentence, because you want them to come out. I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you, Susan. Paul, would like to add anything?
Well, just one thing. Sentences are potentially infinite. They can be infinitely long. You could have one long sentence that from the beginning of the universe to the end of the universe, theoretically speaking. It's because of a property of language called recursiveness. So what Susan is saying here is, in the end, you've got to control the amount of information that goes into one sentence. And she gave you some very good practical advice as to when you want to limit things to one idea, and when you might want to talk about putting 2 or 3 ideas into a sentence. So I mean, that actually what she said is good advice. But then you have to really look at your own situation and see what allows you to make your, I'll use the metaphor again, to make your voice come through a text. And if you are working with other people like ethnologists do, and you want to have the voice of the community, you need to think very carefully about what would they want to emphasize, and put that into a single sentence, and then you elaborate on that later on. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Paul and Susan. So next one, I would like to combine 2 questions. I think this one is from Norbert and also Wiwik. So Norbert would like to ask whether there are discernible distinctions in writing styles employed for the qualitative and quantitative articles, the difference between those two. And Wiwik would like to ask whether, it is difficult to distinguish between the academic and non-academic word when we write. Do you have any tips for that?
I'll answer the second question first.
Okay, sure.
Okay. I think the question was, is there any way we can distinguish academic versus non-academic? Is that what it says?
Yeah, because sometimes it's hard to distinguish between the, when to use which.
I believe in my lecture there, I mentioned that in academic language, there are features of the academic language, and one of the features is vocabulary. And I'm very specific. One feature of the formality of the language can be seen specifically in verbs, adjectives, and nouns. These particular ideas have, in English, many versions that are informal, like 2-word verbs versus 1-word verb. And I think I showed what's the difference between these 2 things. And then you have vocabulary in terms of nouns as well as adjectives. So specifically, there is a very clear, at least in English, okay, there's a very clear distinction between formal verbs, formal adjectives, and formal nouns versus informal ones. Okay, so the idea is for you to go, I think if I recall in the lecture I said, when there is a formal alternative, go with that rather than the informal one. Okay. I'm sorry, what was the second question again, Sherman? First question, I'll answer the second question.
Yeah, the first question is about the distinctions in writing styles, particularly between the qualitative and the quantitative articles.
Can I answer that, Susan?
Okay, sure. Okay,
Sure.
I'm just gonna, okay.
No,
Hang on a
there's
minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, grammatically speaking, and in terms of lexis vocabulary, there is no difference. Of course, the way in which you have collected qualitative data and quantitative data is completely different, and that's basically what you're going to be. That's what you're going to be talking about. Like what is it that qualitative data can actually show about about some phenomenon that we're looking at, and then of course the next thing is what kind of research findings do we get out of that, and that will be different. I mean, you get an entirely different picture of your subject when you do it qualitatively and when you do it quantitatively, because they're basically answering different ways of they're reflecting different ways of looking at your research topic. So, and I think oftentimes we feel when we're writing about these things, the sentences seem so different, and that's true because they're looking at things in very, very different ways. Something that can be measured versus something that cannot be measured, but it can be articulated, essentially. So, I mean, that's, that would be the difference. But in terms of the grammar and the actual vocabulary used, it'll be a formal vocabulary. Susan was just saying, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah. I think there's also, we tend to think that because it's quantitative, the language should be more objective versus qualitative in a qualitative study.
Yeah. Subject. Yeah. I'm sorry.
But there's room. There's room in, I believe, there's room in a quantitative paper for some qualitative analysis. It really depends on what you're saying in your paper. But just because it's a quantitative paper does not mean that you don't use any qualitative words. You know what I mean? So I think it's hard to say this is qualitative and this is quantitative language. And you should be actually familiar with that in your own field. See how people do it. Because my stance is, if you are a beginning writer, okay, if you are already proficient, published, so you have more, how do you call it? You have more ability and
confidence
to deviate from the norm. But if you are just starting off, look at what's happening in your field and follow what is the current normative style. That's the safest one. And then as you get better, you can just begin to establish your own style. I'm so tempted to tell you a story, but I do that later.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I hope that answers your question. It's very hard to say this is quantitative, this is qualitative, boom. It's not black and white like that.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
But just my general advice is look at your field, look at the field that you are directing your paper to. And really goes back, how do you do this? Read, get to know the stuff out there. And then decide for yourself, okay, this seems to be the norm, I'm going to go this way. And then as you grow braver, you can start to deviate from the norm. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much. All right, our next question is quite one of the most favorite questions being asked by the participants, I think, in the past few years regarding the use of AI. Right? So we have Risma and Elizabeth here asking about the same question. So Risma asked about, sometimes it might be difficult for us to write in better English. Therefore, we use this AI to help us, better or finish our working, especially in academic writing. So what do you think about the AI? Do you think it's better to use the AI, or do you think it's better to have like the translator service? And Elizabeth also asked about whether or not every journal accepts articles with this kind of AI framework. Oh, sorry, I think I read the wrong questions. But yeah, let's just go with the first question first from Risma. What do you think about AI?
Oh, Susan,
academic writing.
That is yours, Susan. Go right ahead. Do that.
I knew somebody was going to ask this question. Firstly, and I personally believe this, I strongly feel about it, and I think it echoes with what has currently been said about AI and specifically about ChatGPT. Okay? What you write must be original. It's your ideas. It's your assessment of the situation. It's never, theoretically, it should be authentic. It should never have been there because it's your data. You analyze it. You found this particular finding. Now, what AI does and what specifically ChatGPT does is they look at data that's already been published and then they put it together, which means it's not yours. It's somebody else's. So there is my basic objection to the use of specifically of ChatGPT. You can only work with something that somebody else has already done, which if you do that, then negates the authenticity of your findings. I'm sorry, when you're presenting your paper, it has to be your ideas. You cannot that's why if you want, you can use it for maybe for the related literature. But then again, when you do your related literature, you're looking at set of data or set of readings that you yourself see something of connection that perhaps nobody has seen before. Because your paper must be new, authentically yours. And I don't think definitely ChatGPT can do that, not yet. And A1, I don't think can do it, not yet. Who knows, maybe next year they'll be able to do that, but not right now.
Nah, not never.
But additionally, I don't know about in your institutions, but some institutions have really not allowed the use of AI or ChatGPT particularly. Okay, I mean, I don't want to name any schools, but they say, no, you don't use that. Perhaps you can use it, all right? There's room for it. Maybe as an editing tool, because it's already there. You published it or you put it out there, then it can help you make it better, all right? But if you're talking about a research paper that you are supposed to have originated, you can't rely on something that, for example, ChatGPT does, which relies on data that's already been published or said several times before.
Now, what about Grammarly, Susan?
Grammarly, I think you can use because that checks your grammar.
Hmm.
And really, that's like asking somebody who's a language teacher or what, to just edit it for you. Okay, but I think in generating ideas that only you are supposed to generate, you cannot ask these AI things to do it for you. In fact, there have been, I don't know whether you've been reading up on it, but there have been claims that AI has produced inaccurate information. Don't know. But you don't want that. You want your information to be accurately told, and only you can do that, which is why I think goes back to what we do. You've got to know what your ideas are and how to best express it. If you want to refine it, clean it up, grammar, fine. Maybe you can use AI to basically clean it up. But you are the originator, must be. That's the nature of the work you're doing. Cannot rely on AI to do this for you. I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry, I feel very strongly about this because, yeah.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have questions from Gilang here. So a question about many journals put their research questions as their title. So do you think that's possible? If so, then how should we differentiate between the title and the research question itself?
Well, let me just make it go then. See your research question, your research, the title of your paper has to be indicative of your entire text. It's not a suspense movie, who killed X? Okay, you have to say, who killed X? Why? That's the title. Because then the essence of your message is already in the title, which is the point of the title. Your title is not there to merely attract and hold people in suspense. It's there to give them an indication of what is the essence of the message in your entire text. So yeah, you just cannot ask it. I think you just cannot ask a question. Anything to add, Paul? You should not just ask a question. You should ask a question.
No, that's good. Epiphany, I have enough to say. You've said it all. I'm speechless. Okay. No,
Okay, thank you very much. So we're gonna go around for like another 2 or 3 more questions for this past 10 minutes. So yeah, Elizabeth asked about, so this one is directed to Paul. Paul, do you mind explaining further about the basic IA framework? Does every journal accept articles with this kind of framework? If you can provide examples, that will be helpful. Thank you.
Right. Well, in the IA versus IMRD frameworks, the difference between them is whether or not, first of all, it's the kind of research findings you have. If you have research findings that have been generated largely from quantitative quantitative data, then IA kind of works better with that. On the other hand, if most of your data has been generated from qualitative data, then the research findings tend to be more easily handled in the IMRD framework. However, there's something else you need to worry about aside from those two things I've just mentioned. If you feel that your research answer and the arguments that support that research answer are going to be contested by your readers, it's probably better to use the IA. In other words, the IA, basically introduction argument, right? The IA thing will allow you to foreground the arguments immediately. So you just get right into it to basically explain to people and to justify, if necessary, why your research answer is the way to go. And typically what you'd be arguing there is that you're arguing the descriptive adequacy and explanatory adequacy of your response, of your answer to your research question. And so if you anticipate there's going to be some problems, you may not want to muck around with explaining method or with laying out your results before you then discuss it. You might want to get straight into the argument. On the other hand, if you do have quantitative, especially if you have quantitative data, you may want to spend some time explaining or at least outlining your method for collecting and analyzing data. You may also, especially if it's quantitative data, sometimes findings, it's easier to lay those findings out in a logical order. So here's the first finding you need to be aware of before you can understand what my other findings are, how my other findings contribute to supporting the research answer. Here's the second one that you need to understand before you can understand the rest of them, and so forth. So it's easier to kind of lay that out. Then you can basically argue, in other words, explain why these findings, when you bring them all together, create a new understanding that's more descriptively adequate, more explanatorily adequate than in previous understandings that your research community has held about the topic. So that would be roughly it. Again, I think as you've been seeing, kind of the red thread that connects everything to what Susan and I are saying. A lot of this really depends on how you're viewing your material, and in the end, you have to make a decision. But once again, as always, take a look at people who are writing on your topic or writing on similar topics in your area of research. See how they're handling this, and you will get some guidance. But it's self-guidance, okay? You're going to get some guidance from your own experience of reading these things to see how they handle things. But okay, that's essentially what I have to say about that.
Okay, so yeah, due to the limited time, I think I'm just gonna choose one or two more questions. So the next one is from Muntaza. So Muntaza noticed that in Susan and Paul's video presentation, you mentioned about rhetorical writing. So can you elaborate more about it? Because
What kind of writing?
Rhetorical.
But I'm sorry, what's the word again? Rhetorical?
Rhetorical writing.
Oh, rhetorical. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We do. I mean, the whole purpose of a research article is to engage, is basically to engage your audience. So of course you want to engage them. For example, you do want people to think that what you have is significant, that it's important to your research community, that there's stuff that's poorly understood about this research topic. And if our research community does not manage to be able to deal with these poorly understood aspects, then we are in ignorance. And that's the last thing a research community wants to be seen as ignorant. So there's that category. And then basically, in the end, we're presenting something that nobody has really thought about, especially about poorly understood relationships between ideas about a particular topic. In other words, we kind of know what these ideas are, but we can't see how they're related. We haven't done the work to show how things are actually related in a way that joins them together and increases our understanding of the research topic. So you want to, you're reaching out to your audience to do that kind of work, to show importance, significance, a gap, something's fully understood, and then finally something that kind of closes that gap up with a new understanding of the research topic. So yeah, that's right. Your question is really right at the heart of what we do as researchers and what we do through our writing, not only research articles, but everything we do.
Can I add something to that? For
Sure. Yes, sure.
I think what's also maybe this is some aspect that perhaps not everybody thinks all the time. I mean, it's people know it, but they maybe needs to be highlighted every once in a while. That you need to know who you are writing your paper for and why. Because sometimes, you have written something and then it's written for an entirely different purpose and reason. Like I've had people giving me an article, a journal article. And so I said, why did you write this article? Oh, I wrote it as an essay for my class. But that's the audience is your teacher, not the people who are interested in your field. So sometimes we forget. That's why I like to remind people that, when you are writing a journal article or an article, or your research article, you're communicating and you have to know who you're communicating to, because if you know that, then it's much more aligned with their needs, okay, versus somebody who's writing for a totally different audience. So bear in mind who you're writing and who you're writing your paper for and why.
Okay, and let me just elaborate a bit on the why there. In research writing, especially research articles, there's only basically four purposes for which we write. Okay, the first one is my research community has a particular understanding of this research topic, and I am going to add something. I'm going to add something. We're going to extend. I'm not going to change my research community's understanding, but I am going to extend it to something we haven't studied before, to basically show that our understanding is descriptively and explanatorily adequate or not. Okay, so that's the first one. The first thing is I have found something really, really interesting about this research topic. And when I look at our understanding of the research topic, I realize that what I have found has not been described yet, or maybe it has been described, but the way that these things, these newly described things relate to each other, the relationships between them have not been explained yet. Therefore, what do? Do I throw out my data, or do I actually modify the understanding in some way so that it becomes more descriptively and explanatorily adequate? So that's the second thing. The third thing, and this is very, very rare for a research article, but I'll put it out there anyway. It's more for books and monographs. But look, the research community has countless times tried to extend or modify our current understanding, and all these past attempts have failed. It's just time to start over again. It's time to come up with a completely new way of looking at and way of understanding the research topic. And as I say, that's rare, but it can happen. And then there's finally a fourth way. This is where people have made claims about the descriptive and explanatory adequacy of our current understanding in our community about my topic. And I have looked at these claims, and there are some serious gaps in these claims that really suggest we should not pay attention to them. So in other words, you then set out to defend the current understanding of the research topic. Those are the four things that you're trying to do. Now, many of you, if you've written papers, now I haven't seen your papers, and I'm not quite sure what state they're in. But one of the major problems that people have as they're drafting things is they try to pick out 2 or 3 sometimes of these 4 of these four purposes that I've just outlined to you. And the reason for that is because when you look at people's research projects, oftentimes they may be medium scale or even large scale research projects that actually are actually responding to 2 or 3 different purposes. But if you try to take that and put that all into one article, remember we're talking 5,000 words here to 10,000 words, and you're trying to achieve 3 purposes or 2 purposes in an article that size. You're not going to do it. You're not going to be successful at that. So make sure that you choose one and only one purpose for writing that article. Okay.
Sorry, can I just add something? I know we're running out of time, but I really want to bring this point up of the four purposes, because I've seen this a little too often. Sometimes the writer feels very strongly about an issue, and it doesn't nearly stop at giving the information. It starts to become advocative. So it becomes a paper of advocacy, and that becomes really the pushing a point, pushing a perspective that is supported by his or her findings. So I usually point that out to them. Say, why did you write this? Are you writing this to fill a gap, a research gap, or to push an issue? Because those are 2 distinct topics, and you don't try to do them in the same paper. Okay, so, and you can see that, or going back to the first question, you can see that in the language that people use. They become very emotional and all that. So it loses the perspective that you should have in a research paper. Okay, and with that, I think, we're running out of time. So I hope that's helpful, but I just
Gosh, Susan, we just got started. Don't we have like 4 or 5 days to do this? Oh,
I think we have like a full month for this, Paul. So
no,
we're gonna stay.
No,
All right.
there's a lot to discuss. There's really a lot to discuss here. I think this morning's discussion has been a really, really good start to get people to think about things. I hope it's been useful in any case. Okay.
Exactly. So therefore, I would like to ask you to
turn it back over to you now. Go ahead.
No. So yeah, do you have any maybe 1 or 2 last words before we finish our session? For Susan first, perhaps, to conclude our session for today. Okay, maybe Susan, you can go first. Do you have anything to say? Yeah.
Okay. My advice is, you see, writing is a very solitary and agonizing process, and you just have to persevere. I was just telling the group of people that in one of our earlier workshops, I think 2013, I dealt with somebody who was writing something on the Philippine Studies store. That was 10 years ago. Recently, he wrote me and said, Susan, I finally published my book. And it was amazing because, first of all, he remembered what we talked about in that lecture, in the workshop. And he reached out to me to say he had done it after 10 years. I hope it doesn't take you that long, but just to let you know, there's a lot of work ahead, but you will get there.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, and basically, not to pat myself on the shoulder too much, but I think if you use our materials, they are designed basically as not so they're a heuristic device. They suggest certain things you could try doing that will keep you on focus as you're planning, as you're drafting, as you're revising a paper, both in terms of basically selecting content, organizing it, and then wording it. And you can use these things actually to, if you go back to the questions that we keep asking of you in the material, then I think you'll actually find that they will help. But the thing is, you have to engage our materials. Our materials do not give you any answers. They give you a framework in which you can raise questions and then answer the questions yourself. It's actually great if you, and we don't mind if you do this, if you take the materials and share them with other people who are also writing.
Yeah.
And as a writing group that you use the materials,
Yes.
you use the meta language within the materials. The meta language is embedded in the questions we ask, and you use those questions to talk to each other to interrogate. That's a metaphor there. You're not a policeman or anything. to interrogate the text, so that you're getting down to what you actually want to say, and you're getting the help of other people to do that. Okay, so good luck.
Right. Thank you very much. And for the participants, if your questions have not been answered, I would like to suggest you to read our FAQ sheet from the past workshop. I would like to send a link here, just in case maybe your questions resonates with other questions from the past years. Okay. And so yeah, with that being said, thank you very much once again, Paul and Susan, for a very insightful session, and also to all the participants for your engagement. I believe that we learned something new today that will help us in the quest on publishing an international academic journal. And yeah, before we bring this YouTube live session to end, furthermore, I would like to also extend our gratitude to Head Release Foundation, whose support and dedication have played a crucial role in making this event possible. Their commitment to fostering academic excellence is truly commendable. And our academic writing workshop is not over yet. We will still back next week for the last session on the 27th May at the same time. And we highly encourage you to mark your calendars and join again, to clear your schedules and to take on these opportunities, take time to review your notes, and also don't forget to explore your recommended resources and prepare any questions or insights that you may have for our future sessions. And once again, on behalf of the organizing team, we thank you once again for your active participation. We will move directly to the breakout room after this, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week for the continuation of our academic writing workshop. Thank you, and see you next week. Once again, thank you, Paul and Susan.
Okay, thank you.